an opportunity for people to take a look at the draft that, I co-authored. Also, it's a co-authorship already with Leland Beaumont, and Lena had written some of it, and I think that I also got some of it from Raven Connolly, her definition of the Dark Renaissance, which she might have coined that term. So this is an opportunity for a little bit more co-authorship before we actually publish it. It's already published. It's already published.
Where do you plan to publish it?
I'm not quite sure. For one thing, if it's good enough, perhaps I could submit it to the Integral Leadership Review. I don't know. I'm not saying that I'm qualified for doing anything at that level, but it could. With co-authorship with people who have someone who has experience in that way, Otherwise, I'll probably just publish it to Medium. I know it's already published to Wikiversity in some form, but something like that. We'll figure it out. All right, so I guess maybe people are here, and if anybody else joins, then we will let them join midway. So did you guys see those documents there? First of all, we can do that. I might also share my screen on at least one of these documents and start with the intro essay. So this is, to frame this effort here as coming from two important things that happened in the last months. And that one of them was Jonathan Rowson's essay in the Dispatches from a Time Between Worlds, Metamodernity book, 10 Flavors of the MetaCrisis. And that is that we are dealing with several ongoing, interrelated, interdependent crises. Probably the most important is the ecological emergency that we are dealing with. And then we have several of these other, institutional or sociocultural crises that are preventing us from actually, as a people, as a civilization, adequately addressing that and living. We don't have the ability to really live sustainably, to stop degrading the environment so much. Things just keep, in terms of socio-cultural matters, we seem to be getting more and more divided. And there are, at a little more at the core of this is probably this sense-making crisis, or, really bad distortions to the information ecosystem. And I would also say that at the core is the meaning crisis. A lot of people have been talking about this. I know that not everybody's completely on board with there being a meaning crisis, but what has framed by John Vervaeke that
is that meaning crisis? Is that an understanding crisis or a purpose crisis?
I think both. I think that is how Vervaeke is. So it's not just is life intelligible, but also what is the purpose of life? So he does have, I think that he said this in his, I went through all 50 hours of his awakening from the meaning crisis. And he said that roughly 25 of that is for one of those two that you just mentioned, 25 for the other. It's like intelligibility, like what is, the foundational aesthetic of consciousness, of life, and then also what is the purpose? And I suppose you could say both of those could be treated differently, but that's the word meaning has multiple meanings, right? And so that seems to be like, one of the things at the core. And that's why there's been a lot of discussion on, spirituality and other forms of ecologies of practice to get people to understand, some sort of find some sort of meaning in life. I would also say that's probably an important reason for why you sometimes have these mass shootings. These people who don't have any meaning in life. They're like, my life is meaningless. Just kill everybody and kill myself. I don't know. So there you go. And so we have that. And also there's been just a couple months ago, Joe Lightfoot came out with that liminal web essay, and that made quite a splash. People really like how he was framing that. And so what he doesn't have, though, is kind of a teleology to that. Several of these organizations, as a part of this liminal web or sense-making web or emergencia, have some sort of purpose. And there is a lot of, I think, consensus among these organizations within the liminal web, and also within, people who have, a little more, not quite at the level, there maybe have a postmodern or modern or traditional sort of worldview, that they would still have, there's a lot of consensus that we have this crisis, that there's, our world is facing serious problems, and these are existential threats to our civilization. So there's a lot of, there's disagreement on what to do about that. And I wanted to focus, I wanted to look at all of the different, what we can say thought perspectives or value memes, and what are some of the more common approaches to addressing this metacrisis that they have within those value memes, but also mostly within the integrative or metamodern value meme. What are the approaches there? And that's where it relates to the so-called liminal web or emergencia. And then within that, I identified, I was thinking there's probably several of these that mix different approaches together, but then I wanted to see if I could identify first generation approaches that are really focusing on something in particular, and they've been around a little longer. And then the second generation approaches are those that mix together these, so I think that if you guys can see the essay, that's what it says, essentially. And then we could, if I could maybe start to show the probably first the spreadsheet, You could also bring it up on your end. It's one of the links there. So this table, the accompanying diagram, which Leland has corrected me. It's not a flow chart. It's a inheritance diagram. Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it shows how these different approaches inherit from each other. And
you're sharing the wrong sheet.
Am I?
Yeah.
Huh?
It's definitely not the one you shared as a link.
Really?
I think he might just have it formatted differently. Hold on.
Let me see.
Oh no, yeah,
there's no lines and arrows.
No. There's approach to addressing the meaning.
So there's 3 documents that I shared. So this is the second one.
In the comparison table.
Yeah.
Okay. You're talking about the flow chart, but you're sharing.
They're all related. All 3 of these documents are related. And what I wanted to do in this discussion here is give you guys an opportunity to see how I have it kind of structured. And oh, you know what? Hold on. I shared the wrong document.
Yeah, you have different column headings.
Oh, you know what? I'm freaking stupid. Sorry about that. That other one that I did share, it's the wrong document. Okay, so something else I'm working on. I need to slow down sometimes. So just a second here.
So the one on the screen is the right one, the one that you shared in the group.
Yeah, that's right. One. Yeah.
Okay. Got
the
it.
other one is important as well, but it's like, you know, not for this particular thing. Sorry about that. So let me show you here. Whoops. Oh, crap. Sorry about that. So once again, I'm gonna try to share this document. Okay, this is the correct document. Should probably go to Facebook and correct it as well here.
All right, this is the first I'm seeing this one.
Yep.
Well, sorry, I gave the wrong table in that document. I hope you guys didn't look at that one very long, because that's, you know, quite unrelated to this.
I looked at it for a very long time and couldn't figure it out.
Oh, well, that's fine. I mean, it's something else that I was working on. It's in fact something I've shown to a few people, including you know, Thomas Bjorkman, Daniel Gertz, and others, and they thought it was pretty cool. But it's definitely entirely unrelated to this.
Yeah, I tried to relate it. That was my error.
All right, so you can see how this does relate to that inheritance document. Each item in this list here, in this table, each row, corresponds to a box, you know, in that inheritance document. There's a few things that I wasn't quite sure about, you know. In fact, one thing is, well, for one thing, several of you guys here on the call are experts in at least one of those areas, probably, like Lena here, you know, an expert at the Folkbildung 3.0. And I identified that as a primary metamodern approach. And I wasn't sure if it would need to be considered inheriting from Enlightenment 2.0. You know, so that depends on how narrowly or how broadly you define Enlightenment 2.0. But I think that kind of more of an idea here is that the primary approaches then could kind of live on their own, but that you know, they aren't necessarily comprehensive. So I don't think anyone would say that Enlightenment 2.0 by itself per se is comprehensive. It would need more specifics to show, you know, here's what we're doing. And dark Renaissance or meta sense making, those don't seem to, for me, to be inheriting from Enlightenment 2.0, but neither are those you know, fully comprehensive. So some of these other second generation approaches inherit from those, and they, you know, so they partially inherit from Enlightenment 2.0, and they partially inherit from something else, you know, maybe game B, and then you can have a more fleshed out, like, here is the full approach that we're doing to try to address the meta-crisis. So that's kind of that's kind of what I'm trying to get at here. You guys can tell me if it is intelligible, the way I've structured this, the way these, you know, inherit from each other, etc. And you can just raise your hand if you have any comments or questions or suggestions.
One thing that comes to mind just looking at it first glance here is if you've considered being more specific on the value meme or thought perspective, as you label it, for each of these approaches, so that say, well, the overall the effective value meme of it is this, but it has elements of these things, and also, of course, as soon as we do the hierarchical labeling, then I'm curious if it's those are labels that you want to express if each approach is more constructive, more better in last sense than others. I think I am very personally very attracted to the cynical indifference. I don't know if that helps you, the question there.
So could you maybe restate that? I think one thing you were saying is define the value mean. So those are defined elsewhere, but I'll offer a link to that. There's a lot of places where those are defined, obviously spiral dynamics and other places, Now, you had a couple other things you were saying or after that.
Yeah, so if you have considered doing a more detailed description of the value means of these approaches, so
just offer a link. I mean, there's places, I could offer a link.
I mean, the difference.
Metamodernity, I could just, or other places. There are several books.
Yeah, I mean, if there are differences to how you deem the different approaches as integral or metamodern.
Do you mean making some distinctions between like the fact that there's a whole bunch of integral metamodern and maybe those are different flavors of integral metamodern is what you're thinking?
That's kind of the idea. So, and in fact, this is one thing that I definitely want to add at some point if I could figure out how to do this. To look at within the integral / or integrative metamodern, what are the hinge points within that? So you can say some of them are more strongly weighted toward a certain epistemology or ontology. I also have some notes that I could have additional columns within the table for for example, the role of nature, the role of industry, the role of the people, the role of institutions. I know that Leland had put together a two-dimensional grid for revolutionary versus evolutionary, and also the other axis was what I think individual versus institutional. Yeah, so those are ways in which to give more depth to this, to more thematic depth, more based on what are the core values or epistemologies or ontologies within the integrative or metamodern approaches. And that is, I think, that would be the true value of this one if we were able to get that published and, get it vetted and get it, published so that you could see then, here are the different, second tier, people who having nuanced opinions but then you can still see, you can size them up and compare them and decide what you believe, what you think is a realistic approach or not, So primarily the way this came about is that, first of all, you did, there was that essay by Jonathan Rouse about the 10 flavors of the MetaCrisis, but also I was the guy who is, I guess, kind of the successor to Marshall McLuhan, Mark Stallman. He was on the Stoa and he's saying, I have a distinct approach to the MetaCrisis. And I was thinking, okay, and he said it's different than others that are out there, et cetera, et cetera. And I wanted to understand what that was. And it was also Greg Enriquez saying that his approach of Enlightenment 2.0 is different than the so-called Dark Renaissance. So I did a little research to understand what this is. I could also tell that Enlightenment 2.0 is a little bit general. There are several different more specific approaches that derive from that. You know, you have, for example, a section within the book Nordic Ideology called Enlightenment 2.0. So they're obviously inheriting from that. It also seems that several of the other approaches are inheriting from that in one way or another. And so I'm trying to understand, like, how do these approaches differ from each other? How do they maybe inherit from each other? But then there's also a different way that we can go about this to add depth, which would get a little more thematic on that. You know, we could add columns to the table to provide that. I just don't have that yet. Leland?
Yeah, I think an important leverage point that is understated here is the one of governance. Okay, now governance, I guess, is the kind of towards the top of the institutional hierarchy. But I'll give an example that in the United States, and a large majority of people are in favor of tightening up some gun controls, but it never happens in Congress. Similarly for climate change and so on. So unless the governance structures are better able to reflect good sense, we're going to be kind of stuck here. I've been interested. I learned the phrase liquid democracy from Jim Rutt. That's kind of cool. I just read the book Politics Industry by Michael Porter. He has some good proposals there. But the idea of governance, I think, is a key leverage point and maybe has to be highlighted here.
Okay, Jill.
Yeah, actually, it turns out I want to jump right on Leland's point, which is I don't know if there's a setup I missed, but when I look at this, what comes to mind is this idea that, you know, okay, well, let's step back on this. What do we all have in common? We all have kind of are tackling this incredibly complex, huge problem. I've heard other people say maybe what we have in common, or maybe what at least the liminal web has in common, is a willingness to tolerate each other's points of view. And then, of course, the idea that, like, we're all kind of intuitively understand if we could go beyond tolerate, what would it look like for us to, like, you know, now I'm jumping on Daniel Thorson's frame of harmonize. Like, would there be a way to use this structure to point at where would the kind of dialogos or disagreements, constructive disagreements, happen between all these different members? And it could be a kind of infinite fractal thing where I could enter my thing in and say, here's my productive disagreements, with the idea that if that ever could grow into a greater understanding each of those disagreement points and allow for, you know, this evolution, I think that Brendan's really trying to host here on this group of synthesis and becoming larger and stronger together. So anyway, I just wanted to point out, like, some structure that maybe could contain that in the relationship between the things, is that here's what would it take for one group to adopt the other, meaning what maybe is their perspectives that would combine to a greater whole.
All right. Lena.
I was thinking along the lines also of governance, but also institutions or venues. I mean, where do these discussions take place? That is one aspect of it, but also, so that would be venues or meeting places. The other one about institutions is perhaps one level lower than governance, but it's still part of where can this take place? I mean, if this is to be more than a discussion in various more or less closed groups of friends and foes, where can this make a difference? Who could take these ideas and run with them and do something with them? It doesn't have to be governance. It could also be companies. It could be many places.
Okay. So I know that I can't share everything on the screen simultaneously. So for one thing, I know that some people just joined. I'm going to have to add back into the comments that one of the documents I shared was the wrong one. That's the spreadsheet here. So the idea is probably that on your end, you guys can pull up the documents, the spreadsheet, and I'm going to stop sharing the spreadsheet here, and I'm going to move over to share the inheritance document, because at least with that, I can show the whole thing on the screen. And if you guys want to see the spreadsheet, you know, the one that I offered in the link initially was actually the wrong spreadsheet. So the one that you could just look at the last comment that I just added and go to that, and that accompanies this diagram here, because each box here corresponds to a row in that table. Okay, so I see that there's more people who have their hands raised. Just a moment here. Okay, Jen Zendal.
Yeah. Hi. So I'm just looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, what's the purpose? What's it going to do? It's going to help us to have an overview. And I like what Lena was saying about the relationships and kind of the family, and where are those families, and maybe how they're relating to each other. And I'd like to see some way where are the overlaps and where are the differences. And I don't know if you, I mean, it's quite, obviously you're working on this, but if you know, follow anyone who does like information, graphics, information is beautiful, is a really good, I think there's a website or there's a book or something where the way you present it helps to support the ideas. So things like using color, using kind of, it's very, very dry the way it is. There's not, apart from just arrows linking things, and it looks kind of muddly. So we've got we've got a zone where there's an awful lot of crisscrossing, skinny lines. There's not kind of the picture is not telling the tale. It's still, although you've laid it out, it's not helping us to tell the tale of what those relationships are. And there are things like, how do I describe, more fuzzy ways of seeing it that allows you to see overlaps rather than it's sitting very linear, they're very boundaried and what have you. So I would kind of really like you to see you get a relationship with a visual storyteller or somebody who's good at that kind of stuff. So it's not about making it look pretty, it's about communicating visually the relationships. So if we had families, we had some blue people, and I mean, we use this, don't we, blue and red and what have you, but we start to understand by color and shapes and relationships and positions. They're positioned to each other in a way that lets us understand their relationships to each other. I'm very much under the kind of Nora Bateson kind of thinking where I'm very keen on kind of emergence and what have you. And I think governance is the top-down view, but the other view is that governance, a lot of governance is the problem and authoritarianism is the problem. And actually, if we're working from the bottom up and we're actually communicating and we're changing sufficient minds of ordinary people. I'm not talking about getting the academics to get it all right. The academics know everything about the climate and what have you, and it's not making enough of a difference. So there needs to be some kind of what's happening at grassroots and communication and memes and that sort of thing. So the bottom up kind of thing. So I think it needs to come from both sides, top and bottom, rather than, we've been looking at governance and leadership and everyone's doing leadership. And maybe we need a bit more fitting in with each other, a bit more collaborative rather than leadership and trying to kind of jump to the top with the best idea. Maybe there isn't one best idea. Maybe we need a whole basket of ideas. And in a way, I quite like this because I like the kind of this basket of stuff is all starting to kind of, we can see it all in one picture. So just a few ideas from my point of view.
All right. Yeah, admittedly, I could, just one of the most obvious things I could do is I could color code these, according to the standard colors and all that, that's one thing. I admit that I'm not exactly, my aesthetic sense isn't quite my forte, and I could probably work with people on that to try to figure something better out. This is a little bit of a spaghetti in here. I wanted to draw the lines as far as I could figure that they should be. And some of these lines, there probably could be more. That's still, though, even if I did that, it would still not exactly come out as being clear. You just have a bunch of lines going all around. That's something that you'd only be able to get the gist of it if you looked very closely at it.
Sure, color's only a beginning. It's also about placement. So, for example, if we imagined these were people in a family and they had family likenesses, and you stood the cousins next to each other, and you had the brothers and sisters together, and you had the twins who are it's kind of it's thinking visually. It's not just about it's trying to make everything supporting the ideas, so that and that's. Part of that is about really, really digging down and thinking about what the relationships and the memes and the ideas sit and how they sit in relationship, which, I mean, it's amazing. You've already done loads of work on it. But it's just like, you understand it, but it needs to be grokkable at a visual level.
Yeah, so, I mean, admittedly, there are some, just the way I approach things is this sort of way. I come from a software background, and things don't need to be fully intelligible in there when you have design documents, because then, that just, it feeds into code, and the code takes care of it from there. As long as someone who's trained can understand the document and what it means. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to capture that, but there are probably other sorts of documents or diagrams that we could go at that convey different aspects of what we're trying to do here. Because I think that one of the end goals here is that people can, within this space, broadly speaking, and people can look at the different approaches and different ideas and mix and match as they think necessary, So like, just one of the more fundamental things that I think is interesting to look at is within this integrative or metamodern. We have fundamental approaches that are heavily weighted on science and reason, but within keeping it understanding or acknowledging the postmodern critique, and that would be Enlightenment 2.0. Some are more based on aesthetics and not trying to use rationality to save the world. And that's the Dark Renaissance. And I think that game B isn't necessarily inheriting from either one of those, because it seems to be like, okay, we can have a technological solution, not a we're going to have profit motive drive the whole thing, but it's a separate kind of approach to technology, wherein we're going to try to find a way in which everybody can win at the game of life, rather than there being winners and losers, So I was kind of figuring these lines coming off of here are the more fundamental approaches, and then you can later have some approaches that derive from two or more of those. And it's probably wrong that Folkbildung 3.0 lives on its own out here. I just wasn't sure where it connected. I also wasn't sure if it needed to inherit from Enlightenment 2.0. But what I'm trying to convey with this meeting here is this is the kind of the structure of this particular diagram, and we can work within this framework to correct it. But then if other people have ideas for different kinds of diagrams or different kinds of tables and charts, we can co-create on that. There are some limitations to the way I think, and I'm not going to see every possible angle for this, but just looking at this end game of, we want to convey the teleology of these different people, organizations, and intellectual movements within the so-called liminal web or emergentia. There's a teleology there that can be, that we can look at. We can look at the similarities and differences across different approaches. And that's what fundamentally I want to do here, so that we're aware of that. So we can then have better approaches for working together and cooperating. And okay, so I'll just move it. Next person is Brandon.
Hi, this is really cool. I really enjoyed this. I think it's valuable, so I appreciate this. And one of the things that came up for me is that this is sort of framed as these are different approaches to tackling the meta crisis, which is, I think, the approach to addressing the meta crisis is column B. But one of the things I throw out there is the potential that not all of these, at least as they're articulated here, these memes in different ways are addressing the meta crisis. For example, if you look at what's under sort of religious fundamentalism and arguably others, it's sort of, there is a crisis, a perceived crisis that value meme is sort of, trying to articulate a solution to. But that's sort of one of the things that might be interesting to try to map into here is like, if not all of these memes are addressing the meta crisis, and you could make the argument because it's sort of inherently out of the purview of and again, this is if you buy into the whole meta systematic thinking and all that sort of thing. But if that is the case, then how would and can we form coalitions across these different memes and cultural codes to tackle the same problem? Because potentially, very even likely, trying to resolve a problem that we see as at the meta crisis level might be antagonistic to what a religious fundamentalist might be trying to do, or any other number of the solutions in this table. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that point.
Well, yeah, I do see that this notion of the meta crisis as we're roughly defining it. Even within integrative metamodern approaches, there's a diversity on what exactly it means, but there seems to be quite a considerable amount of consensus. Perhaps not 100%, but then if we go to the other value memes, or what we can say the first tier value memes, these are probably not a lot of them would actually agree that there is the meta crisis as we're defining it or anything close to that. But there is probably there is agreement that there is very serious problems in the world and that something needs to be done about it. As you mentioned, the religious fundamentalism, they wouldn't often agree that there is anything close to a meta crisis as we're talking about here, but that they think that there's big problems somehow and you need to do something about it. So that's if I suppose then if we generalize even further about world crisis or life crisis or problem, somehow I think I wanted to capture that. And the purpose of that is because I can see that some of these, even though this is it's not comprehensive, but each of these value memes have at least one approach to dealing with, what are perceived to be the biggest problems of life, or in acceptance of it in the case of cynical indifference. I just wanted to have that there, right? So the other ones are, okay, what is that approach? And then I could see how some of these then play into some of the second tier approaches, the so-called holistic back to nature. That's something that does seem to play into some of these approaches. And so does, the Marxist approach. I can see how that plays into some extent, and the techno-optimist. So I wanted to have that there so you could see that multiple inheritance. In some cases, these second tier approaches inherit partially from some sort of a first tier approach. And I wanted to explain that. And then I guess then that makes you think, okay, well then you can notice that not everybody is, this notion of the meta crisis is actually not universal across this document. And I can acknowledge that as well. So I'm trying to avoid, putting too much into the document to the point where this is not a boil the ocean approach, that I'm trying to make it manageable there, but I wanted to also capture this, you know, among these metamodern or integrative approaches, where do the ideas come from, and how are they similar or different from each other? So again, so that we can look at it as people and also as organizations to say what approach makes sense to us, and maybe we can borrow from one or two or more of these, and we can collaborate with each other to meet these goals. That's the ultimate point here. And I'm trying to make these series of documents and diagrams intelligible to be able to meet that end. Any follow-up?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. Or how to put this. So one thought is that in some ways, what this diagram kind of brings out for me, or is instructive about, is to think about how these different value memes construe the crisis, because I think that can really help organize how we think about responses to it and how we think about organizing across cultural codes to solve problems. And one of the huge challenges there that I feel like deserves a lot more conversation is how to do that effectively. You know, is it possible that metamodernists could be, you know, dialoguing with and actually working on the ground with religious fundamentalists in some way, right? And what does that look like? Or is that not possible? Is there something antithetical about the visions that are and the responses to the very construal of the crisis being different, right? I mean, yeah, so I think that this is helpful in at least bringing those issues to the fore, which is important. Another thought that comes to mind is it might be, practically speaking, more helpful to also separate out the integrative metamodern approaches. They are the bulk of the chart, and they are also, I think, where presumably the highest chance of finding common grounds and working together would be happening. So it sort of seems like potentially the chart is sort of combining two things, two ideas at the same time, and maybe separating them could be helpful if we're trying to optimize organization across these different groups. And then just the last thought about that is that I'd love to see these different groups come together, not just in like one-on-one individual podcast conversations, but some kind of a conference or a real brainstorm session where you have all these different voices in the same room and trying to hash something out and see if something bigger, synthetic come from that. But anyway, so I think all that is really helpful, and your diagrams kind of bring all that stuff up. I appreciate it.
Yeah, on that note, we actually do have some conferences planned. In fact, you are hosting one, and I am helping to organize another one that might happen in San Francisco in June, possibly, the Emerge Fest. And I understand that Lena is also hosting one in Copenhagen in May, right? So we are getting together. There's, in fact, now that the pandemic, I guess, I don't know if it's over, but we're pushing forward anyways, and we're going to have more of these in-person gatherings, because there's a lot of communication and interpersonal relating that we can't simulate through these sort of online meetings, you know. So I definitely agree with that. Okay, so Cor.
Thanks. I was thinking around the comments about governance. That's what I'm working mostly with myself, so Socratic methods mostly, maybe also deliberative democracy and so on. I think it's a very good idea for you to limit this to this overview. I think that's very valuable. I think for me to be able to apply what I work with, or apply these things that that is what I'm looking for, to be able to apply that to your spreadsheet with this chart overview. I think that would be the value, I think, for me. But if you have an interest in these, you can say when we get down to tools. Also, Lena mentioned regenerative agriculture in the comments. And governance for me is a tool. I think that's where I feel, in any case, an urge to travel to go, that you could say that the academic debate over what I'll be doing is very interesting, but I really want to get down to work on something that can actually do some change as quickly as possible. So just to say that I think it's good that you keep it simple, but if you want to apply it, think it's interesting to apply it to something that gets more down to earth and concrete. That would be very valuable for me too.
Okay. And so I think that my game plan here is I want to publish this, but that there can be, this could be kind of a additional efforts coming off of this. Some people can take some aspect of this and create their own documents for their own purpose in the coming weeks and months. And just in general, I think, considering teleology as being, a fundamental aspect of life, and within these, emergentia or liminal web, just to think about that teleology aspect. And what I have here is probably just a partial, very partial and very, based on the way I see things. But that if anybody has different ideas for how to present the teleology and how to present the similarities and differences across these different organizations, I think that one of the things we really definitely want to do is have more coordination, more interaction across organizations so that we can start to actually do something constructive. And I want to help toward that end. All right, so I see that people put a lot of comments in the, I just haven't been able to read that, but does anybody else have any suggestions or questions, including any of those who wrote comments? I don't see anybody raising their hand at the moment, but if you guys have any, oh wait, there is someone. Lena, yes.
Yeah, so I was thinking it might also be worth mentioning the sort of Bible for each of the producers of frameworks. So or at least a source where people can go, study what is the core message.
Okay. Makes sense. And that for folk building 3.0, that would be the Nordic Secret, wouldn't it? Right. And this is actually one of the things I wasn't sure about with Enlightenment 2.0. I don't know who coined that term. I think it predates Hansi and also Greg Enriquez. Although I think one thing I do want to concede is that it seems to me that Greg clarified the definition to say, here is what the first Enlightenment, the Enlightenment gap, and also that the recent books a few years ago by like Steven Pinker with what we can call Enlightenment 1.5, he still left out, certain gaps, like what is the mind essentially, and how do we study that scientifically? And what is social science, and how does social science work scientifically? So essentially, that's the Enlightenment gap. That's stuff that these are aspects of life that we are never able to understand adequately before with prior versions of the Enlightenment. And even though that wasn't fully articulated as such in the decades since this new Enlightenment started, I think that I want to say that conceptually speaking, is the common thread, and that seems to be, even for, you know, the core of integral theory with Ken Wilber's books from 25 years ago or so, that seems to be one of the main common threads. I'm not sure if that's true, but that's why I have it kind of structured this way, that, you know, you have essentially different notions of what is enlightenment. And then within the integrative metamodern approaches, some people kind of shun enlightenment, or they just take a different approach that is, you know, probably a little bit outside of the notion of enlightenment. So they don't center that. Jen, again.
Yeah, just to say, really, I noticed in the chat there was a couple of suggestions about visual mapping and what have you. So there's somebody I know who might be able to help. I don't know if you'd like to have a meeting with some visual mappers and perhaps just see if we can, and also somebody perhaps who kind of, she knows this field a bit, but she doesn't know enough, but you could kind of explain and kind of talk it through, and then we could perhaps do an hour's work and see if we could get some kind of mapping that would support the ideas, if you're interested.
Sure, sounds good, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know who it was in the chat spoke up and said she was a visual mapper. I don't know. I scroll back if she would be interested in.
Diane.
Diane, are you interested in doing that?
All right, well, let me go to Michael Cillian, Captain Future.
Yeah, you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, super interesting. So I don't know if you know about it, but I've been working together with Bertola Bergstrand and lately also Christian Möjen. He's been putting together a global community that started out calling themselves first Living Bridges Planet, and they changed name to Impact Journey, and now we call it Community Learning Society. Around this, it's partly metamodern, but there's so much thinking about how this integrates into metamodernism and things like this. It's a global community. He's built people all over the world, many in Southeast Asia and Africa as well, who has a different approach and mindset around this. But it's very interesting to see how this integrates into this, because I think most of the people I see in this community are here from the Western world in this.
Yeah, indeed. In fact, this is something I realized that, in fact, it was just yesterday that I listened to the podcast where Daniel Thorson and John Vervaeke were on the Stoa. And it was also added to the Emerge podcast. And he's talking about, in fact, he starts off and he's talking about, you know, essentially the MetaCrisis. I'm not sure if he used that term, but there's a lot of, you know, similar ways of getting at the same point, right? And he's saying, you know, leveraging Eastern philosophical and spiritual traditions to bring that about. And that isn't captured here. You know, I'm not exactly sure where you would put the original core of, you know, Buddhism or, you know, Vedanta or Taoism. Would those be considered, you know, pre-modern traditional? Perhaps they would. And then you would have then one or more of these approaches down here, having lines brought down into showing that they partially inherit from that. The more lines we add, it just becomes more difficult to see, but at least for me anyways, because I come from that software background and I like to see, you know, just the structure of the meaning at that point. There is a separate notion or aim for this, which is to have something that is aesthetically pleasing and not too busy, not too complex all over the place, you know. So I'm okay with having multiple documents for that, for different purposes, for different audiences. And this is something I want to be able to co-create with. I don't think this is probably what's needed, I think, for, you know, the community building across different people and organizations and intellectual movements, and being able to cooperate and collaborate. We're going to need multiple documents and multiple, lots of meetings and stuff. And that's what they were talking about in that podcast, actually, is they were saying, how do we bring people together and have this create greater, community organization? So that's that's a huge challenge. I think having these sort of documents, visualizations, is one aspect of that, and this is something I want to bring to the table. I want to assist with this, and I want to co-create with people on that. And this is just one attempt at it. So let me go to Henry.
Yeah, I just wanted to tag off of Michael's comments about the Eastern philosophy and you talking about like, oh, does that fit under traditional or what? And I want to highlight that there's a limit of these developmental theories, which are Western centric, and you have put them in here. And of course, as you know, I have spent plenty of time with these theories, so I'm not throwing them out entirely. But some of the things that are on this chart reject the idea of those theories, Nora Bateson being the most obvious and noticeable in recent months. But if we do start expanding out and looking at other cultural interactions, you do run into these limitations. And I think it's worth considering that and taking into account that this is a way to organize things, leveraging these theories that have shown some utility, but that we need to not get too attached to that as we look beyond, and like not try to shove everything back into this and be like, okay, if this doesn't fit, why? What else can we put on here? We can certainly have multiple ways of organizing this data, even in one chart or in multiple charts. So I just kind of wanted to highlight that, and just in case anybody missed the Facebook conflagration a couple of months ago, note that not everything on here buys into the stage theory approach, and some folks take different variations on the stage theory approach.
Yeah, indeed. I bet that Nora would hate this if she saw it.
Probably. We're going to impose this chart on the complexity, and everyone will fit just as it is.
Yeah. So, I mean, I actually haven't personally met Nora, but I'm on the side of the people who think that these charts are useful to scaffold people. In fact, most people out there, it's useful and important and probably essential to get people up anywhere close to the level that Nora thinks, She doesn't need maps because they're all inherently misleading, but in order to get there, so I'm definitely on the
yes, and of course, Brendan and I had that conversation about scaffolding, and like that was one of the themes that we touched on, as a result of that whole discussion. But I'm also really pushing in, this gets to the kind of underdeveloped stuff that I sent you that is in no way ready to be on a chart like this, but really pushing into more experiential modes of relating, and I keep coming to the idea that maybe we don't need as much of the scaffolding as we think, that maybe we've been trained to think we need that scaffolding, and having taken the warm data, people need people training from Nora, yes, people can't jump right there. I mean, even going through that training, that doesn't mean that I'm just like, oh yeah, okay, I understand engaging with raw complexity everywhere, right? I mean, it's one process, but yeah, I don't know. I just want to poke at that and be like, we have many, if not most of us, have come to this work through things that look in, if not strictly developmental, but at least some notion of stages or Gebserian structures or something that has a map of this stuff. And we should consider exactly how much we need those maps and what we need them for, and maybe ask ourselves, are we using these right? Do we really need it here? Because as someone who spent a lot of the last couple of years really deeply focused on these kind of developmental maps, I've surprised myself by how much I'm starting to think like, oh, okay, well, yeah, I mean, those are cool, but maybe we don't actually need them. Or maybe we in a very different way. So I don't know, maybe I'm projecting and being self-centered here, but I want to poke at that some. So that's it.
All right, so a couple of people have their hands, Jill, and then after Jill, we'll go to Jeremy.
Yeah, I want to echo, I totally support that point. I also have like an alternative model, as probably maybe some people see me kind of chime in on that. If given the opportunity, I would walk people through the alternative to stage theory that maybe has a similar, better, I hope, explanatory power. But one thing I wanted to point out is like on the left side of your chart, you know, I really would like to hear from every community, every human community that could be identified, even Trump supporters, everybody, even Marjorie Taylor Greene, like, how do you experience this crisis? How do you map it and steelman their arguments for real as whatever you want to call it, steelman their models, steelman their experiences, steelman what they think the solution is or the barriers to solution. Because I think that exercise feels like the most resonant thing that like a community that gives themselves the title meta should be able to stomach. And then from that, you know, yeah, some sort of container that is allows for emergence of a deeper understanding of all this, and maybe a challenging of what framework can hold all that, what framework can integrate all that, what to do about all that. What would be the container that creates that crucible of people that are willing to evolve their maps of what we're up against, and what would it take to really bring people on board. For instance, I've had conversations with people, I guess I probably shouldn't mention a name, but that are pretty highly visible in this community that think that evangelical Christians might be a better way, you know, much better place to start on anything than Silicon Valley in terms of the quality of intention and what people actually are willing to do. So I'll leave it at that as kind of my ideas there.
All right. I can see that. I can see, you know, adding, you know, more, yeah, I mean, I have coming from traditional here. There's two that are kind of portrayed in kind of a pejorative light here. And I don't have a third one coming down. It's just, you know, hey, you know, we're religious and this is the way we think that things should be. And then some of that then would play into, and I can see that some of that would play into the metamodern spirituality as well. So I'll go to Jeremy.
Hey, Brandon. Sorry, I'm coming in a little bit later, but I think I'm getting the overall picture here, and I've been enjoying everyone's comments. So first, I just want to second Henry's share in that there may be interesting ways or a plurality of ways we might think about scaffolding, just in terms of a developmental map as being one form of scaffolding or one form of mediational bridge, but there may be actually others, which I'm very curious to hear about the plurality of, because it sounds like a lot of us have ideas for how we might be able to share this in a much more relational way. But I would also like to emphasize what someone was mentioning earlier about, let's see, regenerative, solar punk. I sort of if I were to add one in here or tack one in, that's very important, I would say, or even ask as an inquiry that we could explore together, where would that fit in, right? Because a sort of ecological regenerative movement is sort of bringing with systems theory, it's bringing in complexity science, it's kind of metamodern, right? You've got the Jason Snyders, you've got the kind of Chris Maggi small farm futures, right, in terms of bringing traditional pre-industrial farming techniques in practice with modern technology, right? So you get a lot of that remixing, which again sort of confounds an easy trajectory of where they all fit. But, you know, I love to see room for that. And then also, just as a question for you too, with all of the experimentation and how we visualize this map, what are the opportunities does this map affords us to practice that kind of interrelational communication? So like, if not an aim or a goal, what are the kind of practices that this kind of map affords us to kind of crosstalk? Is it co-authoring papers? Is it collaborating on various projects, right? Is it a multimedia project that's working more in sort of the virtual internet space that's attempting to kind of mimetically seed these ideas and permeate culture? Or is there a little bit of everything? So I'm very interested in what this kind of map affords us, and then how it can help strengthen that interrelationship. Basically, I'm kind of looking for this to go sort of interstitial, right? That this is all kind of connections of connections and practices that might emerge in that, where there's more transparency between different groups, and even a sense of, hey, you know, I'm not a developmentalist. Like, obviously, I'm not a developmentalist, but I would be interested in seeing what cross points actually are convergent with, let's say, integral theorist folks, et cetera, because there might be ways that a map like this could afford that kind of coherence, even with difference, right? So yeah, just a few thoughts, but appreciate you putting this all together. I know it's a lot of thought and work to do. So thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, definitely. The purpose is, you know, as you said, you mentioned three things: co-authoring, collaborating, multimedia. And that is one of the things, you know, now that we've had several of these organizations within what we, you know, again, can call the liminal web or the emergentia, and to find a greater integration across these. And even though I'll acknowledge, you know, the limitation of maps, that's kind of just the way I think. And that's what I can bring to the table, is to offer these as a scaffold to help us toward that. And that, you know, I think that we can start to have greater co-authoring or recognizing these interrelations or shared visions or shared values when we have something like this. And then it might, we might end up creating, you know, several different diagrams or charts that are remarkably different than this, but having that coming from a similar purpose, which is how are these related to each other? We don't live in silos here. We don't want to do that, you know? And so let me go to Leland here.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to highlight two comments made some time ago. The first one is that I sent you, I emailed you a little over an hour ago, a totally cool visual map of a hierarchy that might be inspiration for this. So I just want to remind you of that. The other one, though, is a comment that Grant and I made almost simultaneously, which is the idea of showing the oppositions here. What is it that's in place today that is opposing these efforts, okay? So on your chart, you show religious fundamentalism, which is opposing Enlightenment kind of things, but maybe capitalism, or maybe Mitch McConnell, or I don't know what it is opposing these. There's a technique called force field analysis that lines up, this is the status quo, this is what's moving forward, this is what's moving against, and you can strengthen these and diminish those to make progress. So just the basic idea of showing what is in opposition to some of this stuff might be very enlightening.
Okay. Well, this is a lot of really good suggestions, and you know, it's a lot. It's more than I could personally do. So I just wanted to say that I'm definitely willing to co-author, co-create with you guys, or if anybody wants to, you know, has some sort of inspiration on the basis of what I'm saying, what I'm offering here, either that you think you want to seize upon, or, you know, some of it and run with it, or that you see something here and you say, well, that's just completely wrong, but it inspires you to create something quite different. Any of that is completely legal as far as I'm concerned. As part of my project here, a lot of the things I want to do are pretty much, you know, public domain, co-creating. I'm thinking, in fact, even of creating a holonic authorship. I don't know how this is going to come together, but with my you know, Enlightened Worldview project, we could create a fictitious persona that is the author of, you know, the stuff that we're doing, and that's a little bit similar to Hansi Freinacht. I don't know, it'd be a little bit difficult to manage that, so I think it'd be kind of cool to do that, to create a fictitious author of these artifacts, you know. But anyways, let me see here. Does anybody else have a hand or have a comment or question? I know a lot of people joined kind of late. So you can, if you have any questions or comments or suggestions. So this is kind of a start of, you know, what could turn into a lot of work. A lot of work could come about from this. And I think what my role here is a little bit of a cat herding. I'm looking at a very high level of the whole space, you know, the sense-making space, and how the next generation thinking, what are the similarities, what are the differences, how can we work together to meet our goals, our shared goals, how can we realize that? So that's one of the things I'm offering, and there's a lot more work to do in the future. I think what I'm going to probably try to do in the short term is just to publish something close to what I have here, because I don't have, you know, a million hours to put into this, you know, but I've taken notes on the suggestions that you guys have, and several of these suggestions I think could turn into, you know, a similar related document somehow could be created. Other documents could be created to talk about, to get into different aspects of this, of what is the teleology of these organizations, these metamodernism, integral, or game B, or anything related to that, or building. What is the teleology? How do we address the greatest challenges of our time, and how can somehow we get these visualizations that allow us to see what our shared visions are? I do thank everybody for coming here. Looks like we got quite a turnout of some pretty top names within the this whole space. And I want to give one last chance. Does anybody have any additional suggestions? Or okay, Stephen Lawrence.
Yeah, I just it's a thought that I have, and I don't know. I can't say much other than I'm interested in how can this be. How does this? This is a lot of theorizing, right? Some people would say that these are disembodied theoreticalism. I mean, how do we embody this? How do we bring this onto the ground, onto the level of the ground? It's a question I have. I know that, you know, you really can't really avoid, I don't want to use the word elitist, but I'm going to. I can't find another way to put it. This is very separate from, it's not separate, we know this, but it can be, at least appear to be separate from a lot of different types of subcultures. I know earlier someone said something about they used the word even Trump supporters. And I appreciated the sentiment though, because they talked about how do we access the, you know, I don't think they used the word wisdom, but I'm going to say something kind of controversial here, which is that there is some wisdom in some of those who, you know, have voted for Trump. There is something there. You know, I don't know what it is, right? But there is something there. And I teach at a college, you know, and 74% of our students are students of color. And I taught in the K-12 public school system for years. And so all these theories and, you know, the post-colonial movements, those who are defending the traditional, you know, methods of teaching and learning, these things are pressing against my actual work on the ground. And it's impacting students in very real ways. And then of course I come from, you know, I'm speaking personally here just for a moment. You know, I come from a world that one could say, certainly a lot of my own family and the world I come from are Trump supporters, because they're of a certain kind of subculture. They would not be interested in any of this. It all just sounds like woo, right? It also sounds, so again, I just have a question. It's a big question. It continues to burn and I don't have an answer, but it's something that I really, really wonder, how do we translate I see the usefulness, of course. How do we translate this on the ground? It's just a really good question I think needs to be foregrounded and kept on the table on a regular basis. Because people are hurting.
You bring up an excellent point, and in fact, earlier today, Leland Beaumont had sent me an email saying that I could add another column to the table. If you have the table up there, and I know I didn't add the correct link initially, but it's in the chat. Hopefully you can see that. The table that could have another column for, I'm sorry, what was it? Approach? It's not approach.
I think I called it implementation.
Implementation. Yeah. So implementation.
And I suggested that the Living Wisely work that I've done, which I put in the chat here, is an implementation of one of the enlightenment levels.
Definitely. And the implementation probably of something like Dark Renaissance is having, aesthetic movements. Implementation of Bildung is to actually have these, folk high schools or the modern equivalent of that. So there is this table or the flow chart or these diagrams that's kind of disembodied, but there is an embodiment implementation of it. And
I want to just correct my statement since it's recorded, that when I said even Trump people, that's exactly the point I was getting at, is that intellectually this would appear to be inaccessible, but through steel manning, their direct experience and their lived wisdom, I don't think we'd see such differences. In fact, I don't think we'd see any, because that's not how wisdom works. So I was really kind of trying to take a stand for them instead of kind of derogatorily putting them down by saying that, yeah, if we could get into something that comes forth, other people have spoken to values, but I think it's the entirety of their perspective and lived experience of it, including their wisdom into what they see from their perspective the solution would look like. That would be the true integral doing of it that I was kind of wishing for this group, I guess, or some group. Sorry, thanks for letting me just clarify that point.
Yeah, Jill, I just want to say, I should have mentioned that. That's where you were coming from. And I love what Turquoise just said about star manning. That's Angel Eduardo's phrase that he came up with, where it's not enough to just steel man the perspective of the Trump supporters or anyone, but to look at get into the bones of their identity, their sense of self, and to see the possibility that they are, in fact, whoever the they is, good people. So star manning seems like I feel like that would be a great thing to include. If I could just quickly share, I'm just going to quickly share it in the chat window, and then I'll sort of stop talking. There's a really great essay that was written recently. It's called, let's see, it's called What's to be Done About the Vaccine Hesitant by Rael Kaya. And it's really beautiful. She talks about the power of spell words like anti-vax, Trumpers, SJWs, like the power of those kinds of words and hypnotizing us away from seeing the humanity and the intelligence and the wisdom and the lived experience of the other. Anyway, thank you for inviting me. It's been really great listening to all this.
All right. Does anybody else have any comments or questions? I guess we might we've been going at this for about an hour and 20 minutes, so probably see if anybody else has any additional comments or questions before we kind of wrap it up. And we might have follow-up discussions on this. In fact, this could be a whole series of discussions to, related efforts to put together a series of essays or other kinds of diagrams, or if those are too disembodied for people, there's other things that could come out of this. So I just wanted to give anybody, if anybody else has any additional comments or questions, just go ahead and speak up if you'd like. All right. And I guess I already gave my closing thoughts, but if anybody else has any just closing thoughts, I'm gonna make sure I record everything you guys are talking about here, and
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you, Brandon, for bringing us together and doing all this work and giving us something to kind of put some hooks into and think about. It's great. Thanks a lot.
You're welcome. All right. Well, thank you guys all for coming. And I do look forward to chatting with you guys in the future. And you guys have hope you guys are, your new year is off to a good start. You know, hopefully 2022 will be a big year for us. You know, maybe we'll be able to start to actually get people together to really address the MetaCrisis in some sort of way this year. Who knows? All right. So I think someone just asked a question here. Can we somehow share? Yes, please. You guys know my email, which is brandon@enlightenedworldview.com. You can see I'm a little bit biased toward the enlightenment side of things within this work, within this chart here. And but I wanted to give a fair shake, you know, to other approaches, or also recognize that the best, I would say the best approach is one that draws from both the Enlightenment approach and also other first generation integrative metamodern approaches. And that's sort of fuller integration is probably what we need somehow here. All right. Thank you guys. And I'll look forward to seeing you at some point in the future. All right.
Take care, everyone.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Will you send out the mail, record the mails from the chat before you close it down then, Brandon?
Yeah. So I'll send that out to everybody that, you know, the chat here, so that you can see that. All right.
Thanks.
Thank you for all your work, Brandon, and convening us here. Amazing. Appreciate you.